Hello, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to talk a little bit about the history and the controversy surrounding the game Kult. Um, this has always been my favorite role-playing game. I never really got into D&D and such, but this game has really stuck with me my entire life, or gaming career for that matter. But when I was playing Colt back in the day, this was during the 90s, it was actually called Colt Death is Only the Beginning. Um, I unfortunately was never able to buy the book. If I would have bought it, I would probably have kept it. That's why I actually have this, just to make sure it never goes out of print again. The original book can be found online from time to time, along with some of the expansions, the original expansions. But just to give you a general idea, what it goes for is somewhere around £200 to maybe £300, along those lines. So it's very rare and very, very expensive. Some of the expansions that existed, or even adventures, I mean, the Black Madonna was available back then. It was a pretty big box with 2 books in it. We have this book today, which is pretty much the same adventure. It's still very macabre, a very disturbing story. But this one actually existed back in the days. There was also a expansion called the Metropolis. The Metropolis was a pretty big box again with 2 books in it, I think, and some extra data sheets used to expand your gameplay. Fortunately enough, Metropolis these days is actually included in this book. Here we go. So it's actually included in this one today. So it's never going to be an expansion again, I think. So the controversy or the history about this, I know the original one was released in Sweden. That's where I played it. And I think it was also released in France, maybe? Not sure about the rest of Europe or even the world. This book, however, I seen is being played in North America, which makes me very, very happy. There's a lot of cult followers around the world these days. But the original game, I'm again not quite sure how well it traveled. But this game was a huge, huge controversy during the 90s in Sweden. It was actually on the news. It was that big. And there was this huge debate regarding if it was going to be banned. And in fact, if actually role-playing games overall was going to be banned. So this was due to this game. This game actually created that whole debate. Obviously, it never happened. Nothing ever happened. And if something would have happened, I mean, people would still meet every Friday evening and play regardless of what. But this game really was a controversy to behold back in the 90s in Sweden. However, Cult Divinity Lost, I would say that this, sure, I mean, it's still very macabre, it's still very dark and all that. And to be honest, it's actually a little bit more supernatural and wonky, if I may say so, because we got all of these weird creatures and such. Yes, they existed in the original game as well, but I mean, they were so rare, you never really met any of them unless you traveled to the Metropolis. So it kind of became, if you went to the Metropolis, it was kind of be like the next X-File episodes, like, oh, what monster am I going to encounter? And I feel that this game is a little bit more like that than the original one. There's also some issues I have with some of these archetypes. I mean, to me, it just doesn't really quite make any sense, some of them, and some of them are like so... Well, I just don't know what to say about these professions. It's, I mean, a occultist and a profession, I don't know, and some of the professions have professions. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me, like a veteran, okay? But to be honest, I think that everyone should be playing the sleeper because it makes most sense to me. But regardless, it doesn't quite matter. Overall, the game is pretty much the same as it was back in the day. It's just that there are actually a little bit more adventures these days, like the Black Madonna and such, or rather, those game adventures are still around. But it was very difficult to find game adventures for Kult back in the 90s. So actually, I had to write my own. And since the rules back then, at least, were pretty much open, so I could sometimes make an adventure that was set in London in the 19th century. It worked pretty well, especially with some of these wonky creatures. But some of the adventures that existed, they were really badly written, and I don't know, for those of you who may or may not remember, there were actually this one adventure where you were a couple of hippies on your way to Woodstock, and then all of a sudden you were transported to Vietnam, and it was so bad. But they were really reaching with the adventures back then. Well, with that said, that's a little bit of brief history about Kult. I'm very glad to see that this is back in print and that it actually has a following these days. Again, it's a little bit more out there than what I remembered it to be, but it's pretty much the same thing. It's just that I don't remember if the Underworld was ever in the original game, but I do remember Metropolis being an expansion pack, which, like I already mentioned, is in this book. There we go. And I don't know how many adventures actually end up in the Metropolis, or if some people actually choose to play in the Metropolis these days. But like you see, yeah, there's a lot of much more wonkier creatures, almost a little bit more Lovecraftian, if I may call it that. So this was pretty much the game back in the 90s or it didn't get banned. It created a lot of controversy, and I mean, it was on the news. It was that big. And pretty much the same with the Black Madonna. This is, it's a very cool adventure, very disturbing in a lot of ways, but yeah. Okay, so that was a little bit about the history of Kult. Thanks for watching.